Picture this. You're standing on your family ranch, facing armed police officers sent by your HOA to seize your property, when suddenly Wayne Carver steps beside you, ready to defend your freedom. Would you surrender your independence to power-hungry bureaucrats who profit from keeping Americans dependent on their systems? This isn't just another HOA nightmare. It's a modern-day showdown between a hard-working American's right to self-sufficiency and those trying to control how free men live. Growing up in rural Wyoming, I always dreamed of owning a piece of land to call my own. My father taught me the value of self-reliance, how a man should provide for himself without depending on others. Land is freedom, he'd say, and freedom is what makes us American. After 35 years working as a construction foreman, saving every extra dollar, I finally had enough to buy my dream, 20 acres with a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Silver Valley. The rolling plains, the open sky, the sense of possibility, it was everything I'd worked for. The previous owner mentioned a homeowners association that hadn't been active in years, just a formality. The annual fee was minimal, and nobody had enforced the covenants in over a decade. It seemed harmless enough. For the first 2 years, life was perfect. I raised a few horses, grew my own vegetables, and spent evenings on my porch watching the sunset. My neighbor, Tom Bradley, became a good friend. He'd retired from the film industry, but still kept in touch with his Hollywood connections. We'd share a beer and talk about the old days, him in movies, me building America one construction site at a time. Then everything changed. A new board took control of our dormant HOA. They called a mandatory meeting at the community center, where a slick-looking man in an expensive suit introduced himself as Edward Langston, the new HOA president. Silver Valley is entering a new era, he announced, unveiling plans to modernize our rural community. This meant strict new regulations. All homes had to connect to municipal utilities, agricultural activities were banned as unsightly, and hefty monthly dues would fund their vision of progress. As I left the meeting, Tom caught my eye and shook his head. We both knew trouble was coming for anyone who valued independence over conformity. The trouble started 3 weeks later. I'd just finished installing solar panels on my barn roof, 25 high-efficiency units that would take me off the electrical grid. With Wyoming's long summer days, I'd have enough stored power for the winters. I'd also dug a new well on the western corner of my property, where the water was pure and abundant. I was admiring my work when a white SUV pulled into my driveway. A woman in a pantsuit emerged, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I'm Lydia Harper, compliance officer for the Silver Valley HOA. I'm here about an unauthorized structural modification." I showed her my county permits for the solar installation and explained that Wyoming state law protected homeowners' rights to renewable energy systems. She smiled thinly. Our updated HOA covenants require board approval for all exterior modifications. Additionally, Section 12.4 now mandates connection to municipal power and water systems. A week later, the first violation notice arrived, a $600 fine for the solar installation. The next week, $800 for non-compliant water systems. Then $1,200 for my vegetable garden, deemed excessive in size and visibility. When I called to protest, I was transferred to Edward Langston. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "these regulations ensure consistency and property values. Your frontier lifestyle is out of step with our community standards." "These rules weren't in the covenants when I bought this place," I argued. "The board updated the covenants last month," he replied. "Perhaps you should attend meetings more regularly. Besides, connecting to Western Plains utilities is safer and more reliable. We're only looking out for the community's welfare." At the local hardware store, I ran into Tom. When I mentioned my troubles, his expression darkened. Langston's brother-in-law is Victor Grayson, CEO of Western Plains Utilities. They control electrical, water, and gas services in 3 counties. Every house forced to connect is thousands in fees and monthly bills, pure profit for them. This isn't just happening to you, Jack. The conflict escalated over the next 3 months. I ignored their fines and expanded my self-sufficient systems, adding rainwater collection and a geothermal heating setup. They responded with higher penalties and inspectors who trespassed, taking photos and claiming my systems were hazardous. At a town meeting, I learned I wasn't alone. Eleanor Thompson, a 70-year-old widow living on her pension, broke down describing how the water connection fees would force her to sell the home where she'd raised her children. Her daughter, Laura Thompson, a journalist with the Cheyenne Tribune, took detailed notes. Henry Walsh, a Vietnam veteran with a Purple Heart, faced similar harassment over his solar panels and wind turbine. I didn't fight for this country to have some bureaucrat tell me I can't harvest the sun on my own property, he declared to murmurs of approval. We formed a homeowners' rights group and filed complaints with the county commissioners. 30 of us signed a petition challenging the HOA's authority. Langston's response was harsh. The HOA placed liens on properties with unpaid fines, starting with mine $30,000 in violations plus fees. They initiated foreclosure proceedings, giving me 30 days to pay or lose my ranch. This is still America, I told Tom over the phone. There's got to be a way to fight this. Actually, Tom said thoughtfully, I might know someone who could help, an old friend who understands standing your ground. The foreclosure notice hit hard. 3 decades of construction work, calloused hands, aching back, freezing winters, blistering summers, all to lose my piece of America to bureaucrats who'd never built anything real. I consulted a lawyer specializing in property disputes. Her news wasn't encouraging. They've been clever, she explained. That dormant HOA? They legally reactivated it and followed procedures for amending the covenants. The conflict with state law on renewable energy might give us an angle, but litigation could take years and cost more than the fines. I felt trapped. Fighting would cost everything. Paying meant surrendering my independence. Selling wasn't an option. This land was my retirement, my legacy, my home. The pressure intensified. Langston arranged for utility workers to mark my property for mandatory connections. HA representatives left daily notices. 2 board members even approached my horses, claiming to inspect them for welfare concerns. That crossed a line. Nobody messes with a man's horses. I installed security cameras and posted no trespassing signs. When Lydia Harper returned for another inspection, I met her at the property line. This is private property. You're not welcome without permission. She smirked, holding up a document. This authorization from the HOA board gives me legal right to inspect for violations. That paper isn't worth the ink, I replied. This is America, and a man's home is his castle. As tensions escalated, the HOA sent letters to my neighbors, warning against supporting my dangerous noncompliance. They scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss health and safety concerns at my ranch, a clear attempt to isolate me. Some neighbors caved, avoiding me at the store, but others grew supportive, recognizing that today it was my solar panels, tomorrow it could be their garden. Eleanor brought me a homemade pie and whispered that Laura was investigating Western Plains utilities. Henry and his veteran friends started driving by my property, keeping watch for trespassers. On the 20th day of my 30-day notice, Tom called, sounding upbeat. Remember that friend? He's coming tomorrow. Meet us for dinner at 6 and bring all your HOA paperwork, every letter, notice, and piece of evidence about Langston and his brother-in-law. The next evening, I drove to Tom's with a box of documents and a heavy heart. 10 days left before they could take my ranch. I knocked, expecting a retired lawyer or politician. Instead, the door opened and I stood face to face with John Wayne Carver. Jack, Tom said with a grin, meet my friend John. This is the neighbor I told you about. I was speechless. John extended his hand. Says you've got trouble with people who don't respect a man's right to live his way on his land. Come in and tell me about it over dinner. Over Wyoming steaks, I laid out the situation. John listened, his iconic brow furrowing with each detail about my solar setup, and the HOA's tactics. "Been dealing with similar issues at my ranch in Nevada," he said, his voice carrying that familiar gravitas. "Different rules, same principle, people trying to control how free Americans live." "I don't get why they care about my solar panels or well," I said. "I'm not hurting anyone. I'm just living like my father did." John leaned back, eyes narrowing like in his films. "It's not about the panels or well, Jack. It's about control. Some can't stand seeing others live freely when they've accepted chains. And nothing's more threatening to a man who's surrendered his independence than seeing his neighbor refuse." Tom nodded. "And there's greed. Every independent homestead is money Victor Grayson doesn't make." After dinner, John examined my documents, his expression growing sterner. "This isn't just HOA overreach," he said. "It's a systematic effort to drive out self-sufficient homeowners. The selective enforcement, targeting specific residents, the utility connection, it's corruption eating at America's foundation." "My lawyer said proving the conflict of interest is tough," I replied, defeated. John's eyes flashed. "In court, maybe. But there's more than one way to fight injustice. Sometimes you shine a light where everyone can see, and sometimes you make a stand people can't ignore." We talked late, devising a plan. Tom would leverage his media connections, John his influence and understanding of standing firm, and I'd provide first-hand knowledge of the HOA's tactics. By midnight, we had a mission to protect American freedom. "I'd like to see your setup tomorrow," John said. "Solar systems have come a long way since I installed mine." The next morning, John and Tom arrived. I showed them my solar array, rainwater system, geothermal pumps, and garden. "This is what America used to be about," John said, examining my inverter. "Self-reliance, building something with your own hands." We were discussing battery storage when 3 vehicles pulled up: Langston's SUV, another board member's car, and a police cruiser with 2 officers. "Looks like company," Tom muttered. Langston and his associate stepped out, followed by the officers, who froze when they saw Wayne Carver by my solar inverter. Langston smoothed his tie. "Mr. Carter, we have a court order to inspect your property for code violations. These officers will ensure compliance." The officers looked uncomfortable, one a young man with a military haircut, glancing at John with admiration. "Is there a problem?" John asked, his voice commanding respect. Langston explained my off-grid systems violated HOA rules and endangered the community. John responded calmly, "I've been looking at these systems all morning. What I see is American ingenuity, the values this country was built on." Tom recorded everything. The confrontation was surreal. Langston and his associate on one side, me, Tom, and Wayne Carver on the other, with 2 uneasy officers in the middle. Langston pressed, "Officers, we have an inspection warrant from Judge Harrington. Ensure Mr. Carter cooperates." The older officer, Sergeant Paul Mitchell, cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, we need to allow access per this order." John stepped forward. "Before we proceed, what specific safety concerns justify this intrusion?" Langston bristled. "With respect, Mr. Carver, this is between the HOA and Mr. Carter." "I'm a concerned citizen," John replied, "who believes in property rights and due process." The younger officer, Deputy Ryan Ellis, shifted nervously. "We're just here to accompany the HOA, sir." John nodded. "I understand you're doing your job, but I've made some calls." He showed an email from the State Attorney General's office, launching an investigation into the HOA's conflicts of interest. The connection between Mr. Langston's family and Western Plains Utilities might be a legal problem. Sergeant Mitchell examined the email, then looked at Langston. "Is your family connected to Western Plains Utilities?" "Victor Grayson is my wife's brother," Langston admitted. "But that's irrelevant." "Really?" Tom interjected, filming. "I have board meeting minutes where you pushed mandatory utility connections without disclosing that relationship." Mitchell folded the order. This inspection will wait until these allegations are addressed. I can't enforce an order that may be compromised. Langston's face flushed. This is obstruction. I'll report this. Feel free, Mitchell replied. Chief Norris will be interested in potential ethics violations. Deputy Ellis spoke up. There's a Wyoming law from last year protecting renewable energy installations. My cousin had a similar HOA issue until he cited Wyoming Code Section 68-15-904. Langston pointed at me. Carter's running an agricultural operation in a residential zone. Agricultural operation? I laughed. Growing carrots and keeping 3 horses on 20 acres in rural Wyoming? That's just living. And the evening news might be interested in how an HOA is forcing homeowners to abandon self-sufficiency for a board member's family business. Langston's composure cracked. Turn that camera off. First Amendment says otherwise, John interrupted. Freedom of the press, another principle worth protecting. The confrontation ended with Langston and his associate retreating, promising legal consequences. The officers apologized and left without inspecting. John placed a hand on my shoulder. Round 1 to the independence movement. But they'll be back. Power and money don't surrender easily. Tom grinned, stopping his recording. Not when they're up against stubborn ranchers and Wayne Carver. He sent the footage to Laura Thompson at the Cheyenne Tribune and his contacts at KTVQ in Billings. By night, it was on every Wyoming news channel. The headline wrote itself, Wayne Carver stands with Wyoming rancher against HOA power grab. The response was overwhelming. Neighbors expressed solidarity, strangers shared HOA horror stories, and a Wyoming law professor offered pro bono help. This isn't just your fight, Jack, Tom said, showing me the video's 500,000 views. You're a symbol for everyone pushed around by those who control how Americans live. Langston issued a statement claiming the HOA cared about community standards, but it fell flat. People demanded to know why his brother-in-law profited from forced utility connections. 3 days later, John called the Wyoming governor, whom he'd met at conservation events. The governor's office announced a review of HOA regulations, focusing on conflicts of interest and renewable energy restrictions. The pressure grew. Laura Thompson published an exposé on Western Plains Utilities' corrupt practices, revealing political donations to officials who pushed mandatory connections. Henry Walsh organized veterans for a silent protest outside the HOA's board meeting, holding signs like "Freedom isn't free, neither are forced connections." A week later, the county commissioners held an emergency session in the Silver Valley High School gymnasium to accommodate the crowd. I testified about the fines and threats. Tom presented evidence of Langston's ties to Western Plains Utilities. Residents shared stories of intimidation. When Langston defended the HOA, claiming off-grid systems caused hazards, Commissioner Clara Evans pressed for documentation. He had none. The state attorney general's representative announced a formal investigation into the HOA's practices, citing potential breaches of fiduciary duty. John addressed the commissioners by phone, his voice filling the gymnasium. I've advocated for conservation and land use for decades. What I saw at Jack Carter's ranch wasn't about safety, it was about suppressing independence for profit. America has a tradition of standing against such overreach. The commissioners voted to suspend the HOA's foreclosure authority pending the investigation. The crowd erupted. That evening on my porch with Tom, watching the sunset reflect off my solar panels, I felt hope. John said this fight's happening nationwide, Tom said. People living independently versus those profiting from dependency. We might have turned the tide in Wyoming. The Attorney General's investigation moved swiftly, fueled by public outrage and John's influence. Within 4 weeks, they uncovered damning evidence, emails between Langston, board members, and Western Plains Utilities executives. Targeting self-sufficient properties ensures a 25% revenue increase, wrote Victor Grayson. The HOA had a secret enforcement list targeting independent properties and had falsified meeting minutes to authorize covenant changes, a clear case of fraud. Langston and 3 board members faced criminal charges for fraud, corruption, and conspiracy. The Attorney General declared, "This is one of the most egregious abuses of private governance I've seen. In Wyoming, we value independence and won't tolerate those who strip freedoms for profit." Western Plains utilities face state and federal investigations for anti-monopoly violations and corruption. The Wyoming Supreme Court invalidated all HOA fines and liens from Langston's tenure, dismissing foreclosure proceedings against my ranch with a judicial rebuke. The governor signed the Homeowners Freedom Act, barring HOAs from restricting renewable energy, water collection, or small-scale food production. It became a model for other states. Langston fled Silver Valley, his reputation ruined. Henry Walsh was elected to lead a reformed HOA, now the Silver Valley Community Association, focused on cooperation, not control. Its new charter protected homeowners' autonomy with a Bill of Rights. Inspired by our success, homeowners nationwide challenged restrictive HOAs, and Wyoming counties revised regulations to protect energy and water independence. One autumn morning, Tom and John visited. "We walked my property, now with a new greenhouse. Independence is thriving in Wyoming," John said. At dinner with Henry, Eleanor, and neighbors, we shared homegrown food, toasting to freedom and unexpected alliances. "This battle's always worth fighting," John said, "between those who want independence and those who profit from dependency." Life returned to peace. My solar panels powered my home, my well provided water, and my garden expanded. Eleanor kept her home, installing solar with a state grant. Laura won a press award for her reporting. Henry led the community with integrity, replacing fines with potlucks and mutual aid. Our story sparked a national movement for property owner freedom, with my ranch as its symbol. When the HOA sent police to take my ranch, they didn't expect Wayne Carver standing with a man defending his right to independence. What began as my fight became a rallying cry for freedom-loving Americans. My ranch stands as a monument to what happens when American values find their defenders, proof that when you stand firm, you're never truly alone.